Welcome to Colonie TV, the governmental educational channel for the town of Colonie.
Well, welcome to Getting to Know You. My name is Joe Nash. Today we're going to be hearing about the Knickerbocker Mansion out in Schaghticoke. And we have with us Stana Iseman, who wears many hats, I guess you could say. She was just telling me all she does. So Stana, why don't you just tell us what is your title, or if there is one?
Well, I'm project director,
Okay.
which means basically I run the restoration projects, but
Okay.
I'm also actively involved in everything else that the mansion does too.
Okay, now today we're going to be talking about a little history of the place and some of the restoration that's going on and some of the events that will be going on over the summer, or I guess they're open from May to October. It's nickmansion.com. It'll be on the screen. You can go there. And we'll also be talking a little bit about how, if you want to help and join and volunteer, you can always use volunteers. Is that correct?
Always, always.
Well, the Knickerbocker Mansion in Schaghticoke, why don't you start with a little, before we talk about some of the history of it, what is the sort of significance of this house? As you know, I know we're laughing because you just told me this long story of how it's important. So why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Well, the house is significant. It was built by the prominent Knickerbocker family, who was the prominent family in the valley, and I call it the valley because the original Schaghticoke was in what was called the Valley of Peace.
Okay.
And that's where the original settlement was. And they were the prominent family, and they built this huge home, which was the center of the activity for that community. And it was built during the Revolutionary War.
Now, was it called Schaghticoke then?
Actually, yes, it was, because that's an Indian name, and that's what it was called at that point. And so that.
And you're talking the early 1600s?
Well, the house was built during the Revolutionary War, but I can tell you more of the history that goes back into the
that's what I was
into the 1600s. Okay. Would you like me to go back?
Yeah, just start
back
at
there.
Yeah.
In the beginning, it was Native Americans, of course, who lived there. And where the Knickerbocker Mansion is situated, it's right on the Hoosic River, which is not far from where the Hudson River and the Hoosic runs into the Hudson. And for the Native Americans, this was a huge settlement because this was the end of the Mohawk-Mohegan Trail, which was the Indians' trade and communication route from the Atlantic Ocean across New England, and it went right where the mansion is, the mansion property, and to the Hudson River. So this is where a lot of Indians settled.
So it was like a crossroads.
It was a crossroads, and it would be like the corner, like the intersection of I-90 and 87 nowadays in Albany.
The equivalent.
That would be the equivalent of that, yeah. So anyway, there was a lot that happened there. We have artifacts that go back 5,000 years.
5,000, okay.
That we have found in the area. But the first date of significance was 1676.
Okay.
And at that point, we have the Mohawks and Mohegans, who are both claiming that area up there. When we had the Dutch in Albany, and Governor Andros here in Albany realized he had a situation that needed taken care of. So he called a peace conference for that area. And he went up in April of 1676, and he brought his counselors, his Dutch dominies, and his militia, and invited the Indians of the area.
Different groups of Indians.
It was mostly Mohawks and Mohegans, but there were others there too, who were refugees from New England, which becomes a piece of this treaty. And so they went and met in what is now the backyard of the Knickerbocker Mansion, and they hammered out the terms of the treaty. And by the way, this conference, it was really called a council, and it was really called a Wittenagmo, which means Council of the Wise. And that's an Old English term, and it was an Old English council that happened, and as it turns out, it's the only Wittenagmo that ever happened in the North American continent.
Oh, really?
which is interesting. But anyway, Andros goes up there and negotiated this treaty with the Indians, and there were three pieces to it. First off, he wanted the Mohawks and Mohegans to get along because they were they were in conflict over the land in the area. And so they agreed to bury the hatchet, and they literally did that when they planted the tree. And then there were refugee Indians coming in from New England because of the King Philip's War. And they needed a place to go. And up to this point, the Mohawks and Mohegans were not really excited about them being there. But in this treaty, they allowed those Native Americans to be in the area until they could gather themselves together and move on to other places, which is what they did. And then the last and the most important piece of this treaty was to take care of the French who were trying to take New York. They claimed New York the same as the Dutch did in 1609 when Simon de Champlain came down the Hudson. They never gave up on that claim, and so they were constantly sitting down there, some of their French army, along with their Indian allies, trying to take New York.
So they would occasionally try to take over.
Occasionally was almost all the time. And so they would come down, and then they would have to be, they'd have to fight them and send them back up, and that was a constant battle. And so part of the treaty was that the Mohawk Indian tribe agreed to take care of the French. In other words, they wouldn't let the French get to Albany. And that was part of the treaty. So to commemorate this treaty, they planted a tree called the Wittenougmote Peace Tree. And it was planted in 1676, and it lived until 1949 when it
we have a picture of that
over.
that people will see on the screen, and that lasted until
1949
okay,
when it fell over in a flood. Now we have the remains of the tree in the backyard of the Knickerbocker Mansion now. So we tell that story, and you can come and see the remains of the tree and the pictures at the mansion. Now this treaty worked well for about 25 years, but the city of Albany realized that they weren't really being as protected as well by the Mohawks from the French as they had hoped. For example, there was a Schenectady massacre. There were raids into the Schoharie Valley and around, and so the city of Albany was really pretty nervous that they might be next.
Did they always come down this way, like through?
Well, they would follow the Hudson River down.
Okay.
But it was the people. It was the Indian tribe. It was Mohawks at that point. But in following the Hudson, where the people in Schaghticoke are is right next to the Hudson. So they were on the east side, but they were able to stop them, or sometimes they would go north. Well, what the city of Albany decided to do was buy some land from the Indians and have farmers go up there and farm, but their first job would be to defend against the French and their Indian allies. So they would be the Albany's early warning defense system. So that's what they did. The city of Albany bought land, and can you believe they bought it in early 1700s? They did not take it back or get paid for it until the early 1800s, so more than 100 years. That was City of Albany property.
In Schaghticoke.
In Schaghticoke. And
you were saying this is like when the French were coming, they would literally jump in a canoe, go down to Albany and say.
Depending on what they had, but there is documentation that when they came, and they came in numbers. For example, there was a Kittle massacre in the October of 1711. And there were about 100 French Indians in the area, which was many more than the community could deal with. So one of the one of the settlers, his name was Daniel Kittlehune, whose family wound up being massacred almost completely in that event, jumped in a canoe and went to Albany to get the Albany militia to come and help. Unfortunately, by the time they returned, his family had pretty much and had been decimated and his property burned and his wife taken captive to Montreal. And that is normal. That was a normal raid, and it happened all along there. But these people were being the early warning defense system for the city of Albany. So Albany didn't get that, but the folks in Schaghticoke did. These farmers knew when they came up there to farm that they were doing something dangerous. And the Knickerbocker family, who were one of the families who rented some of the land, had been there before, earlier, because the first Knickerbocker was the first farmer in what is the city of Mechanicville now, in the early 1680s. So Johannes, who was his son, had grown up there.
Who was the builder of? The Nick Mansion.
Actually, he was the grandfather
Okay.
of the builder of the mansion, who was also another Johannes, but I'll get to that part of the story. And he became commander of that little community in that militia. And this was Queen Anne War period, so there would be militias during that period. But that was theirs. They built a fort. It was called Fort Schaghticoke to help defend the area, and there was constant struggle with the French and their Indian allies. I think this is something that local history does not talk a lot about or talk enough about, because it certainly impacted the life of the settlers up there, and it was something that Albany needed protection from. And actually, the problem didn't cease until the end of the French and Indian War. If you look at in the history of the militia would be quiet for a couple of years and then it's activated. And that's when the French, something's going on, and the French have decided they need to try to get to Albany again. Or it'd be impacted by something that happened between England and France across the ocean. And if France was on the winning side of what was going on, then over in New France, or what is now Canada, they would try to come back down and get to Albany and take over.
No, in the house at the Knickerbocker Mansion, do you have little things people can read explaining a lot of
we talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah, we talk.
Tour guides.
The tour guides talk about that. Yeah, there are not a lot of pictures from that era, since there weren't any pictures to be taken. So you wind up, telling and things that have been documented. We can talk about. Well, this first Johannes had several children, 2 sons. Built homes on that property, and were actively involved in fighting the Indians as they became old enough to do that as time went on. And in fact, right up to the French and Indian War, at the time of the French and Indian War, the first Johannes had died, but his 2 sons, one whose name was Johannes, so that's the second Johannes I'm talking about, and his brother Herman, both were in the French and Indian War. They both fought with Sir William Johnson up at Fort William Henry and also up in Ticonderoga, and spent the rest of the war defending the settlements around Schaghticoke from the French. At the end of the French and Indian War, of course, they were victorious, and it was finally, phew, that danger's over.
Another war was coming.
There was the Revolutionary War coming. Now, Herman died, and Johannes' only son, whose name was also Johannes, so that would be the third Johannes I'm talking about, and that gets a little confusing, inherited Uncle Herman's property, which included Uncle Herman's house. And he got married at the age of 17 to a woman named Elizabeth, and they proceeded to live there, farm, and have a family. And then the Revolution hit, and Johannes II became Colonel John Knickerbocker and commander of the 14th Albany Militia, which General Tenbrook from Albany was the commander of the militias. And so Colonel John was one of the commanders of 14th Albany. So when the Battle of Saratoga was happening, the 14th Albany was called up for the second segment of that battle. And they went over and fought under General Tenbrook in the second segment of the Battle of Saratoga. And
known as the turning point of the Revolution.
Known as the turning point, and they were actively involved in that turning point of the Revolution. After that battle, they came back to Schaghticoke. Colonel John Knickerbocker resigned his commission as commander. He had been wounded during that action. The other Johannes, the younger Johannes, was only a private, and he was not wounded. And they resumed life in Schaghticoke, and neither of them again participated in the revolution actively. However, at some point during the end of the Revolutionary War, the Knickerbocker Mansion then that Johannes was living in burned. Uncle Herman's house burned. So they needed to build another house. So Johannes and Elizabeth built what is now the Knickerbocker Mansion. Its foundation is 6 feet from Uncle Herman's.
So the house now is from after the one.
So that is the house that is now the Knickerbocker Mansion. It was built by brick made on the property, and also using some things from the other house that was there. We have found out. The Knickerbocker family had slaves, so as did a lot of the Dutch people. So they were obviously actively involved in building the house as well. When the house was all done, it was, as it turns out, architecturally significant because Knickerbocker called on his father's way of building, not the modern building techniques of the day, like, say, Cherry Hill or Schuyler Mansion. And it's built with an interdependent wood frame and brick style construction, which is the way homes were built in medieval Europe. So the architecture is very significant. It turns out it's the largest home of the style architecture in the United States.
Okay. Well, people, as we're speaking, there'll be a picture on the screen of how it looks now.
Yeah.
Were people able to see this style? Okay.
Yes, you can see it. Well, we have restored some of the rooms, but some of the rooms aren't restored at all yet, and you can see very clearly how the house was built.
Okay.
But we also intend to leave sections not restored, but available.
Was there a reason why they went back to that older?
That's the way they knew how to build.
Oh, okay.
And that's the way apparently their homes were built, and they knew how to do it. So that's what they did.
Well, it sounds like you've explained well why this area in Schaghticoke is so significant. So how did the word, I guess, Knickerbocker become? I mean, it was a regular family name, but they have, of course, gone down in history as, you know, you got the New York Knickerbockers and anything Dutch. We got the Knickerbocker Arena right here.
Yeah.
How did they go from just being a fighting in the army
and
farmers and to be a little bit more significant in American history?
Oh, well, the name became more significant in American history. Yes. The story. This is the way it happened. Johannes and Elizabeth had 14 children.
Okay.
One of those children was named Herman, which is a family name. You find it in every generation. Who was a lawyer. He started out his career as a lawyer, later became a judge, a congressman, a very prominent citizen in Schaghticoke and around. As a young lawyer, he met another young lawyer whose name was Washington Irving.
Okay.
And they became good friends. Actually, they became lifelong friends. And Washington Irving didn't want to be a lawyer. He apparently wanted to try his hand at being an author. So his first book was a book called The Knickerbocker History of New York.
It was very famous, early American literature.
Right. He wrote it, and it was published in 1809. And it became a very popular book. It was a satire on the life of the Dutch.
Yeah, it was sort of a,
Yeah, and he was poking fun at the Dutch and making fun of them. But the main character in the book was, of course, this is narrated, the book is a narration by Diedrich Knickerbocker. So Washington Irving doesn't use his own name. He uses the pen name Diedrich Knickerbocker. Diedrich, by the way, is the oldest nephew of his good friend Herman.
So there really was a Diedrich.
There really was a Diedrich Knickerbocker.
But he just sort of took that name as...
He used that name, but it was all part of the way he wrote. Yeah. You know, he's always giving a little, you know, a tweak somewhere along the line. One of the main characters in the book is my cousin Herman, who, of course, he's poking fun at his good friend, Herman Knickerbocker. But it became such a popular book that people started using the name Knickerbocker for their place or their product, whether or not they were Knickerbockers.
It became synonymous with
Dutch
anything,
New Yorker.
Anything Dutch,
Anything Dutch in New York. If somebody wanted to have their product have a connection in with the Dutch heritage of the Hudson River Valley, they would use the name Knickerbocker. Okay. So, and in New York City, there were just numerous things, events even, that were called Knickerbocker. There was the Knickerbocker Hotel, Knickerbocker Packet Boat. There was the Knickerbocker Fair. You go, this Father Knickerbocker. There are these caricatures of the Dutch Knickerbocker. And they would be the logos for events and things like that. And Father Knickerbocker was a big one. Probably one of the words that you wouldn't think about right away that was as a result of that book was knee-length pants. Okay. There was a drawing on an inside cover of the book of two young men wearing knee-length pants. Prior to that, writing the book, they were known as breeches. After that, they're known as knickerbockers, or knickers for short. So,
well, the Dutch, you know, they're sort of famous and known for settling New York City and the Albany area. Were they the two main places, or did they sort of spread out farther? Was it mainly Albany?
It was Hudson River Valley.
Hudson River, okay.
The Hudson River Valley. Oh, there was also an area down into beyond New Jersey, down into Maryland, Delaware, but a much smaller settlement.
Okay. Well, that is a lot of history, and people can find out all about it by going up to the Knickerbocker Mansion in Schaghticoke. So Why don't we switch gears now that you've given a little history? How long are the tours? These stories look like they would probably go on for a while. How long does the tour take when you're?
Well, it depends on what you would like. Actually, we wind up basically deciding as we're talking to people.
People can nest.
Well, and it also depends. If you're there for an event where we had tours going all the time, that tour takes about a half hour.
I mean, some people may be more interested in the history of the Indians. Some people may be more interested in the architecture. So it might depend.
Yeah, and we can answer the questions, but we'll tailor if we have a specific group coming. We tailor the tour to that group.
And I should say, this Knickerbocker Historical Society, which runs the mansion, it's all volunteers. Is that?
It's all volunteer.
And I think you were telling me earlier, you probably put in more than a 40-hour week. Is that what?
There are many weeks when many of us put in more than a 40-hour week.
Well, now because of the picture we just saw on the screen, how it looks now, tell us about the restoration. It's still, when did it start, and it's still an ongoing?
It's still ongoing. Well, a lot of the questions that having to do with the restoration is how come you needed to restore it in the first place? And
well, we have a couple of pictures we'll show of how it looked back in 1988, and I think when people see those, they can see that it did need something.
It did need something. Well, what happened was that there was a Knickerbocker Historical Society who bought the place from a local farmer who had purchased it from the Knickerbocker family, actually. And this was in the 1950s. And the Historical Society was formed to preserve and maintain the remains of the tree in the house. They could never get enough money to restore the house, and the house really needed some serious restoration. So by early 80s, the part of the front wall had fallen in, and in that picture you'll see what looks like black plastic or something. It's covering an area where there's no wall. And half of the back wall fell in, and you will see actually the other pictures of the back door where they even let the trees grow up and just basically covered it with plastic. And so by the spring of 1988, they had decided to demolish the building. And that's when a group of us heard that, we went to one of their meetings. And
so it was sort of dormant all through the 40s and 50s?
Well, no, people were living there. People were living there up until the mid-1950s.
Oh, okay.
And then they moved out and sold it to the Historical Society. But the house really needed a lot of restoration.
So it's sort of been going on since '88, more or less.
Yeah, and so when we took over, we call ourselves Knickerbocker Historical Society 2, because we basically took the building from people who we didn't take it, they gave it to us because they realized that we weren't going to allow them to demolish it, and that's what they wanted to do.
Were you part of that original one in 1988? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Original group?
Yes, I was.
Okay.
So the picture you have now is 1988, just after we've acquired the mansion.
Okay.
And since that time, we've raised and spent about $900,000 on the restoration of the building. And there might be some people who would look at that and say, you've been working at this for 25 years. You've only raised $900,000, and you've only got the exterior done and part of the interior. And my answer to that is fundraising from the cornfields of Schaghticoke is a real challenge. There's nothing to compare. Fundraising in Schaghticoke is different from fundraising in Albany. You don't have the businesses, you don't have the resources. We've been lucky to get some New York State grants, National Trust for Historic Preservation grants, and some other private foundation type grants. But a lot of them require a match, and our money is raised by the events that we have and from either donations or memberships, and people working on projects when we can use just people working and not specialists in historic preservation or carpentry or masonry.
Now you're open from May to October. When people come up for these tours, is there a charge?
There's no charge for admission. We welcome donations, but our tours are essentially free. And when we open, but we have the donation bucket out. And actually, I think we do better because. Well, for two things. People who would pay admission usually leave a donation. People who can't afford to pay admission, and this has happened more times than we can tell you about. A family will come in and they've got 4 or 5 kids, or and they really can't afford it, and they might just leave $1. Well, then we say, well, we have events, coming up. So they'll maybe come for an event. Well, then they buy our food. The food we sell, we have Knickerbocker memorabilia, T-shirts and mugs and stuff like that. And so
Do you
then
have
they
any of
come
those
back.
bridges you sell?
No, we don't. We don't have any. We don't have any of that. So anyway, that's how we raise our
All
money.
right. So speaking of events, this show is going to be on probably all during the spring and maybe into the summer. What kind of events? And,
Okay, well-
will you be having this year?
Okay, well, we're open every Sunday for tours from 11
Okay.
to 3. So every Sunday from the first Sunday in May to the last Sunday in October. And then monthly, we have a special event. For example, in May, on Mother's Day, we have our annual Mother's Day open house. And we have a pancake breakfast. We have a chicken barbecue. We have tours of the mansion. We also have a very unique memorial service. Remember, this is close to Memorial Day. We have 10 veterans of wars in our Knickerbocker Family Cemetery.
Oh, okay.
So we always have
From several different wars?
well, several different wars, but they're not the ones you would think of.
Okay.
For example, it would be the Queen Anne's War,
Okay.
the
Oh,
King
all right.
George's
Yes,
War,
you don't.
the French and Indian War. You normally don't hear about them.
No.
Those wars, and the Revolutionary War.
All
We
right.
also have veterans from the War of 1812 in our cemetery.
wow.
So there is a reenactment group. Actually, it's a French and Indian War reenactment group that comes and does a memorial service in our cemetery, and we honor all the veterans of all the
Oh, okay.
wars.
And this is on Mother's Day.
This is on Mother's Day.
It sounds like if you have a pancake breakfast and chicken barbecue, what does it go all day? Is that
It starts at 8 in the morning and it goes till 4 in the afternoon.
okay?
And then July, we have our summer festival. And this year, our summer festival, the theme is going to be the Civil War.
Okay.
And we did have Knickerbockers who participated in the Civil War. But the reason why we took this year to do the theme is it's also the 150th
Yeah.
anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. And we have, we know that some of our Knickerbocker descendants were at the Battle
Okay.
of Gettysburg and fought with the New York 125th.
Now, do you have a date for that? Or?
Yes, it's Saturday and Sunday, and it's July 20th and 21st.
Well, as I say, most of this information will be on the website.
Yeah, that'll.
Nickmansion.com.
Nickmansion.com. I think we still got 2012, but 2013 is going to come up soon.
Okay.
I
I wasn't going to say that.
We have a quilt and fiber show in August.
Quilt and fiber show?
Quilt and fiber
Okay.
show.
Quilts are always popular.
And it's during the Canal Splash weekend. It's in conjunction with the Canal Splash
The thing in
weekend.
Waterford, right?
Well, the Canal Splash weekend and celebrates the events along the canal.
Oh, okay.
We're not smack on the canal. We are a mile from the Champlain Canal, but we are in both the Erie Canal and the Champlain Canal National Heritage Corridors.
Okay.
So
But these are events all along the canal?
Yeah.
Okay, because I know Waterford has something.
yeah, Waterford has something. Almost every community has
Okay.
something going on. There's a lot going on.
And that's going to be in August.
And that's in August. I believe it's the 11th and 10th and 11th.
And this will be, you'll have a quilt.
We'll have
okay.
the Quilt and Fiber Show. September, we have our Harvest Festival, which is one of our biggest events of the year. We coordinate with Hudson River Ramble. We do a hiking tour to Devil's Chimney, which is a Native American shrine up on the Hoosick River.
Okay.
And we have a reenactment group in. We usually have some kind of historical programming. Somebody who plays a character from the past. And that show was on 11, 1, and 3.
Like a reenactor. But they talk to people and stay in character.
Yeah, they stay in character
Okay,
the whole
okay.
time. And then we have great food, harvest produce, all kinds of stuff. But
Well, I'm sure it's nice up there in the fall.
oh, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
But I think our probably most popular event of all is Nick at Night. And Nick at Night is the last Friday and Saturday in October, just before Halloween. And ghosts of the mansions past come back and tell their stories. And we
Okay.
have reenactors who, we have 5 ghosts in the house, and those ghosts are somehow connected with the history of the mansion or history
Are
of the
these
area.
ghosts that there's legends that they really are?
Yeah, the story they tell is historically accurate.
Okay.
And this past year, we had some Civil War
Okay.
characters in there, but that's always.
And when is this?
That's the last Friday and Saturday in
Okay.
October at night, from
Okay, at
6 to
night.
9.
Okay.
We do that with a super supper. But
I see. Do
those
you have
are
the lights off when you tell the story?
lights off and candlelight.
Okay.
It's all candlelight. So that's it. And then the other thing we do is we do by appointment authentic colonial Dutch meals. And so for groups of 15 or more, the meals that we serve, and we do it usually in conjunction with a tour, it's usually one of us talking and about the history, and then we'll take them through the mansion, and then we have an authentic colonial Dutch meal using only the ingredients that would have been used to make the dishes.
Okay.
In other words, there's no shortening because they didn't
Yeah.
have shortening, but they had lard and butter, things like that.
And you use this
and we
authentic
use the authentic
utensils?
recipes.
Do you use authentic utensils only? Or?
You will find no plastic,
Okay.
no paper. So you're eating off, of course, glass plates with silverware and cotton tablecloths or linen, because that's what they had. Soon, we're hoping to be able to add another element to that. We are in the process of building our fireplace system. And the slaves for the Knickerbocker family did the cooking in the kitchen, which was in the cellar of the mansion. That was a typical place for the Dutch to have their kitchens. And we are in the process of rebuilding the chimney system, including that fireplace.
Okay.
So that will be another aspect where we interpret the life of the slaves as they do the cooking. So open hearth cooking and having open hearth cooked meals will be something that we will start doing as soon as we get.
But the authentic Dutch dinner, or is it lunch or dinner?
There's both. We could do
All
either.
right, but these are by appointment only. You have to have a group of how many?
Well, 15. We
15?
need 15
All right.
people in order to do that.
All right, well, there's information about this on the website, again, nickmansion.com, and again, people can join or help or volunteer. Is there information on the website also for that?
Well, there's information for that. You can contact us by, we have an email address, which will be on the, it's nickinfo@aol.com. Our phone there is on the web site, 664-1700. Or you can just send us a letter, a donation, P.O. Box 29, Schaghticoke.
Okay.
That's our post office box. By the way, we're located at 132 Knickerbocker Road. People like to plug that into their
Well, I looked
GPS.
on the directions. It's easy to get to Schaghticoke, so don't worry.
It's not that hard.
Very good. Well, thank you, Stana, for telling us the sort of significance of the Knickerbocker Mansion and all the stuff going on. So there's a lot of events over the summer. They'll be on the website probably by the time that people are watching this.
Yeah, that's our hope.
Okay.
They should have been up now. But
All right. Well, thanks for coming, and
Okay.
hopefully we'll get some people out to come up to the Knickerbocker Mansion in Schaghticoke this year. So we'll see you next time on Getting to Know You.